Julianne spent 25 years, 30 years,
Just over 25 in the Foreign
25
Service.
years in the Foreign Service. She spent a lot of time in the US Information Agency.
Yeah, till it was taken absorbed by state, right?
Yes, yes. And she has a really interesting backstory, I think, in many ways. So she grew up in Mississippi
Hmm.
and was adopted. So there's an interesting story there.
Ooh, I love that story.
As an infant, yeah.
As an
Yeah.
infant, she has a very kind of Hallmark movie worthy romance story. At least
It's
Ooh, okay.
yeah, it's really something. I would not
it's
recommend it to anybody though.
yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah.
She has very strong views on things like USAID and the role of the State Department officers, the Foreign Service, etc. She is a Methodist? No,
Yes.
Methodist,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
and has very strong philanthropic uh, credentials, I
And
think,
social justice as well,
and
I would
social
say.
justice.
Yeah.
Am I missing? I mean, so often we just go where the energy takes us.
We don't know
Well,
where it's going,
I
but
haven't.
it's
I
then I
haven't.
will put myself in your hands. And yes, I'm upset about AID, but I would say I'm more upset with what's happening right now with Ukraine. If we want to get into what I'm
Oh
upset
yes,
about in the current
yes.
moment. But
Absolutely.
anyway,
So with that, I thought I would start the question.
okay.
I had in mind a question for Julia to start our show, which is to guess where Julianne and I met.
Good
So
one.
easy clue, scene setter. I was at CIA.
wait, you can't give me clues. I should try to guess without any clues.
Okay, well then you already knew that. You already know. I was at
Well, have at it,
CIA.
Julia.
Julianne was Department of State. And so how did we meet?
I think you
Really?
met in sub-Saharan Africa.
No.
That'd be hard. I've never been there, but
Um, I mean, okay, then you met at her partner's um uh immigration ceremony.
oh no. Many years later.
No, but that's
We're
you're
getting
kind of
closer.
you're warmer. You're
Yeah.
Yeah,
warmer.
good. See, then you
Yeah.
met at then you met at Ellis Island.
No,
Colder. I
way
have no
colder.
idea where you met. Where did you meet?
Well, I will just say from my part, as I was at a banquet,
Ah,
kind of a closing banquet of this activity I was at, and enjoying where I was, loved it a lot, would love to return. But then all of a sudden, this very funny woman sat next to me, and I could not stop talking to her. And even more important, I couldn't stop listening to her. I really just wanted to hear everything.
Oh, was this in
Sh-
Ireland?
no.
no.
It's your
Okay.
turn now, Julianne.
Well, this was in Bucharest, Julia, so that we
Oh,
stop you trying to put things together. Yes, I was sent over because at that point at State Department, I was the Intelligence and Research Bureau, and we were doing conferences and programs as part of the intelligence community writ large and with our partners throughout international intelligence organizations and communities with which we worked. And so I was there, and since our office had organized it, I was asked to go and lead the delegation, which now sounds ridiculous given there are people like Carmen with a lot more years of experience and seniority than I had. But it was funny to be back and to be able to do it, you know, in Romanian, at least the beginning. And there were people in the Romanian delegation who didn't have such great English and who sort of spent more time with me than I think they would have otherwise, just because I was the only one who could understand them. So, but it was a lovely event, and I thought the Romanians did a great job.
Yeah, I thought it was a fantastic event. And so one of the things that you completely just entertained me with was the story of your Romanian romance. It was
Yes.
like, oh my, I was just like head blowing out kind of thing.
Well, the irony of the whole event where we met was that I would be in that position of working with the head of the Romanian intelligence organization because of the fact that part of my romance story, which I will tell, was being sent home to the United States for falling in love with a Romanian,
Oh,
which
that
was
was
a
not
risk,
allowed.
which was a risk to our national security. But I'll just say
And
as an
that the year
aside,
was, just to put it into
yes,
context, what year was that?
1992. 92.
1992.
And so, just to say, the station chief in Bucharest at the time is spending the rest of his life in prison for selling secrets,
Oh,
as is his son. So, I would like to say I'm not the biggest threat that they ever had. But anyway, like I said,
Really? The
yes,
CIA station chief?
yes, yes. Not
Oh,
not while he was in Romania, a later tour, and his son is there with him. So,
they
okay.
kind
So,
of put their eggs in the wrong basket
so
there.
what?
yeah.
So who is that?
Jim Nicholson, is that right?
Oh
Is that
yeah, Jim Nicholson. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't know him, but I recognized the
so you
name.
see? I'm not
Yes,
the biggest threat.
you
But
were
anyway,
you were just falling in love. I mean,
well,
you
I
know.
will just say this more for Julia's background because Carmen knows me better, is I have always lived my life wanting to have no regrets if I could do anything about it. So I met my husband. I was 23 when I arrived in Bucharest. The revolution had happened about 18 months before my arrival. I ended up in a
One of the
country,
very bloodiest of at least,
the only bloody one,
yes, yes.
the only one where people died. And I land there excited. I had been a Soviet studies major, which then went out the door when the Soviet Union fell apart, but whatever. So I was excited to be there. But I knew that you weren't allowed to fall in love with locals. So I wasn't thinking about that. And like I said, I was 23 when I arrived. But one of the first people I met was the person I ended up marrying. He and several of his friends were revolutionaries, for lack of a better word. After the revolution happened and things were clearly not becoming a democracy with Iliescu in power, they spent lots of time at University Square when the miners came in and beat them up and all these things. And so he and some of his friends decided they would start an organization called Pro Democracy. And it was not going to be partisan. They weren't going to support a particular politician or political party, but they wanted to bring civic education as they imagined it to be to the population. And one of the first steps was to make sure that Romanian people felt like they could believe in the sanctity of the ballot. And so a few months after I met him was the first real election. It was local elections, mayoral and city council elections. And they had Romanians throughout the country where they would call into Bucharest to the office and say, well, I'm in such and such a place. We've just watched them do the first counts. Here's what the numbers are. We've seen it. We feel confident in that. And that way, as the final results came in, they would know if something was happening. And it was so exciting to be there in that with that group of young people, my age in our 20s, watching this happen. And and the organization that they formed, Pro Democracy, was funded after a while by NDI, the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, which funding came from AID, which brings us back to today. But
USAID, the famous.
Yes,
Yes.
USAID.
and so we met at a time when things were just super exciting. And I think I would describe myself, I love people. I'm 100% extrovert. And I just find that I don't know that I've ever met anyone that I didn't learn something from. And I find people fascinating, especially people who come from completely different cultures than I do. And
I would just
so,
interject
yeah,
here. She's
sure.
not just an extrovert; she's a Southern extrovert,
No, I
which
can tell. Like
I
I'm
I
already like,
think I think that's its own like category.
I'd never heard anybody put those together,
I
Carmen,
mean,
but
just think a Scandinavian extrovert or a Southern extrovert.
yeah. That's
Do you
like
have
that's comparing
Scandinavian
like an
extroverts?
no, that's like an introvert. That's what we call an
Yeah,
introvert.
Scandinavian. Yeah, in the South, the Scandinavian extrovert would be an introvert.
Yes. Well, you're from Texas, so I don't know this southern thing. Although I don't consider Texas the South, so we'll see. We could talk about that later. But anyway, so we met, and I just found him to be very interesting. We share a lot of the same taste in music, love movies, love the theater. And, he had been behind the Iron Curtain, but he knew more about music than I did and movies. So there's that. But the only music that I love that I haven't convinced him is good is Grateful Dead, but I've just given up on that. That's not going to happen. So,
Yeah. So he has
but
good taste.
yeah, oh, now.
Sorry.
They're in the they were what the Kennedy Center honors this year, so I was happy about that. But no, so we just got to know each other better, and it became very clear to me anyway that if the rules were not what they were, we would have a different type of relationship. So I am a rule follower, so I couldn't break the non-frat rules. So I went to my boss and I said, "This is how I feel." And he went to his boss, the ambassador. In less than 24 hours, I was on a plane being sent back to America and had my security clearance taken away.
Wow.
So,
Were you grateful? I mean, what were your feelings around that?
grateful was not the
Not the
word I would
word.
use. I
Yeah.
was terrified
Yeah.
in some ways because all I had ever wanted to do in life was to be a diplomat. I luckily passed the exam first go around, and so it had been fortunate, and this was what I was going to do. But, I even at that age, I think I realized that good possible life partners don't come around every day.
Right.
And when you met one, it was worth doing what you had to do to try to make it happen.
So you were
Anyway,
terrified and you did it. At some
yes.
point, retrospectively, you must be grateful that you did it because it's clearly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well,
And
but somehow you have to get back to Romania.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay. So
right.
Carmen likes the story with all of its nuances. So I will try not to
So do
leave
I,
anything out.
yes.
So just to say something though, with what you just said, Julia, um, if I would have been 30 or 32 or 3 when this happened and my career had gotten further along, I would like to think I would have still had that courage. But at 23 or 24, whatever it was, um, it seemed like a no brainer,
Mm,
you
mm.
know? So I say part of it might have been my age and the fact that I was just a junior officer starting out. But anyway, so yes, so I get sent home and we're like, okay, we couldn't talk about marriage because we had never really dated. And so what are we going to do? And
Is he sent home with you? I mean, is he sent to the
no,
US?
no, no,
Oh, so
he's
you
not an
also couldn't talk
American.
about marriage because he's over there.
Yeah, and we had
Yeah.
not
Spend a
talked
lot
about
of
marriage
money on international calls.
way too much
Way too
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
because this is, before you had all the ways we can communicate now, including email and many other things. But anyway, so I we decided could he come, and he applied for a graduate program in engineering at GW and he got accepted. But I'm
Huh.
like, you can't work on a student visa, and I don't have enough money because I'm just a junior officer, and all these things. And so we didn't think that would work. So in the end, I said, I'm just going to take off. And he couldn't get a tourist visa to come because then the embassy they knew. And so I
And you
said,
hadn't
oh,
lost your job, you just lost your security clearance.
correct,
Yeah,
correct. But I didn't know that I was be able to go back overseas again.
right.
So anyway, so I said, I'll take 3 months off, leave without pay, go back to Romania. We'll figure it out. I did that. We did. We got married there and came back to the States. So
Wow.
yeah.
And how did you eventually regain your security clearance?
Oh, you want that story? That's a good story, actually. Um, so
I feel like the story you just told was a good story.
it is.
Hallmark movie quality. What am I,
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. And then he comes
You,
back here. Does he naturalize as a US citizen then?
he does eventually, but that's actually the funny part of the story. So the thing is, it can't be Hallmark, although it's more like Lifetime. But Hallmark, they have now movies that are set at Pelish Castle in Romania, and that's where we spent our honeymoon. So I feel like Hallmark has already been there.
Yeah.
And I always love watching those. And we got to do that because my father-in-law knew somebody who was like in the city council in the region that had Pelish Castle. So he drove us, well, in my car, I drove, and we got to Pellish. He gets out of the car, he goes inside, gets our key, and he has a driver who's come to pick him up, and he drives off. Because in Romania, it's all about, at least then, all about who you know, and everything happens. But anyway, so we get back. Oh, and the wedding, the ambassador, the US ambassador, wants to do the wedding at his residence. And we say no, but we want to get married in the Orthodox Church. But if you'd like to do the reception, we would be grateful. And they did a beautiful reception at
Oh
the
my gosh,
residence.
that's kind of amazing.
It's all just crazy. But anyway, so we get back, and my husband has to go through all the security stuff, interviews, and I was going to get my clearance back once he got his citizenship. So he takes the exam, he gets a perfect score because he's super smart. And then we go to be sworn in. And the INS, at the time, INS guy said, well, someone has shared with us information about you that would disqualify you from American citizenship. And we were just like, what?
Not about you, but about your husband.
About my husband. And so we had no idea what was going on. And I had the security people at USIA, US Information Agency, check. And it turned out that someone at the department had, when my husband was interviewed, when I got sent home, they were trying to figure all this stuff, what might have been going on. The security person at the embassy in Bucharest, the American, said, are you with Julianne just because you want to get to be an American, be an American? And my husband said, no, that's not why I care about her. I've been working really hard for democracy in my own country. So no, I'm not trying to become an American. And so they put down doesn't want to be an American and try to use that. So
that was a misunderstanding by someone who wasn't following very well.
No, it was on purpose.
Oh, really?
It was the person in Romania got in touch with somebody he knew in Washington, and they made the call to INS. So then it became this whole thing where the person who did that had something put in their file, and we were called back the next day or two and said, okay, but it was such a sort of no biggie at that point. Kind of incredibly disappointing way for it all to be resolved, but that's our story.
So how did your family in Mississippi
react
to your Romanian friend?
Well, I married him there before he got to come here and meet them. But they loved him. My mother, who's an English teacher, was an English teacher and very much how should I put this, a grammar Nazi. Loved that his grammar was perfect and his English was so good.
I'm sure it was.
Because that wasn't going to be the average Mississippi husband. So she was totally pleased with that. And the fact that he's European, and, they could just tell that he really cared about me. So they were happy. Yeah.
Nice.
And his parents have always been nothing but absolutely fabulous to me. And our parents met a couple of times, and even though they didn't understand each other and we translated, really like each other a lot. So that was special.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Wow.
Makes me happy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you ended up getting your security clearance back because they could see that was just some BS.
Yes. And once Romania was in NATO, more power to you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about what a good job the Romanians did on that conference.
Yeah.
So 2 significant learnings I got in Romania. And I'm not joking, from talking to from the meetings where the Romanians were like 40-50% of the attendees because it's their place, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the Belgians were there, and there were Americans and French people were there. There was just a
New Zealanders. It was a
it was a nice group of people.
Yeah.
So I remember at one meeting, and I can't, it's a little embarrassing for me to tell this story, but I don't remember the context, but one of the Romanian intelligence guys, and this is just like 2 years after the Ceausescu's have been brutally killed.
No, this was a lot later because this
Oh,
was what in 2000 and
well, so
12
that's
or
right.
11, 12,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm
yeah.
confusing the two timelines. But anyway, so he stands up and says that he wanted to read a poem in kind of to
Yeah.
that he thought was relevant to the situation we were discussing. Sorry, I'm hitting mute every time I cough to not annoy you guys. So he stands up and reads this poem, and I'm going, what poem is this? This is incredible. Well, it was a Leonard Cohen lyric. And
Yeah,
that
of
is
course.
the first time
Yes.
I became aware of
Carmen,
Leonard Cohen.
you do know that for them it's Leonard Cohen.
Leonard
Cohen.
Yes.
So do you remember what song it was? I'm a huge Leonard Cohen fan.
I know it was a poem, a lyric, and I don't remember anything else. And then perhaps even the same day, we're talking about something, and another Romanian pulls out quotes "Systems of Survival" by Jane Jacobs, which I had
which you love,
which I had never heard of, which I now love and share with lots of people. About the two different types of cultures. And I'm like, how is this happening? This is a little arrogant and whatever of me. And
you're surprised that you would learn something.
I'm like surprised that I'm being schooled by the Romanians. And more Americans should have this experience of being schooled by other cultures, because we got a real arrogance problem going on here. And it's getting worse.
That's how I feel when I go to the Czech Republic, that same way. Eastern Europe. Do we still call it Czech Republic Eastern Europe?
Central.
It's really more central.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, my experience there is learning things that I thought were only like Northern European facts and figures. It's
I
like
have
so localized.
Another funny story about Romania that I was just reminded of. So I'm in a cab going from the airport to the hotel, and the cab driver spoke good English, and so I'm always chatting with them, and never been to Romania. And so he said was talking about the sea and the I guess, is it the Black Sea?
It is the Black Sea.
The Black Sea. And he says, but there's a real problem here, because this is how I heard it. All of Cheney's people are coming there. And I'm thinking, Dick Cheney? Chinese people are coming to,
like, how is that happening?
And they're ruining the fishing. And I'm like, oh my God, what's going on here? Well, after enough sentences back and forth, I realized he was saying Chinese people, but the way I heard it, the way his accent was, Chinese people were somehow ruining the fishing. And then he had this wonderful phrase that he used, that the something or other are not to our liking. The whatever it was, the fish of the Black Sea are not to our liking. And I love that phrase. Something XYZ is not to our liking.
Yes, my grandmother used to try to convince my sister and I to use that phrase when we were rejecting food. Instead of saying no, thank you, she didn't think that. She thought that was rude. She was like, no, you would say no, thank you. That is not to my liking.
Well, it's quite elegant. Yes.
Well, but it's just a mouthful when you're like 6.
Yeah, but you remember it.
Yeah, I don't know that I do it, but I remember it. Yeah.
Anyway, so I've always wanted to go back to Romania. I think it's a beautiful country. I only got to spend 4 days there, but I enjoyed it very much, and only in Bucharest. At the time, the tour of Bucharest. So Bucharest, before World War II, was known as the Paris
of the East.
And when we took the tour of Bucharest, you had this incredible contrast between some sections of Bucharest that were still beautiful and sort of bohemian in their architecture,
Yeah.
and then these other horrifying parts of Bucharest where everything had been torn down, and these incredible buildings, not to human scale, dominated the skyline.
Yeah. You're talking about the Palace of the People. Yeah.
The Palace of the People.
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
The Palace of the People was Ceausescu's idea of a large building that would have one part of it would house the parliament, Congress, whatever, the legislative branch. One would be the executive side, and then there would be a court side, and they would all be in this one building. Now, and that building is the largest in the world, volume or wise, except for the Pentagon. Now, the Romanian, I think it's the Senate that's, well, no, I guess the Congress sits there now, but whatever. It's the point being that for a Romanian, they hate when foreigners come and say, oh, what a beautiful building, because so many people died for that building because it was costing so much. And Ceausescu didn't want to have any sort of foreign debt, that he started exporting all the food out of Romania. So there was no food, like the 80s.
Explicitly to get the money to build this building.
Yeah. And so the 80s, the 70s were okay. The 80s, no one could find enough food. It was a horrible time. You not only food, you couldn't find anything else. You couldn't find clothes or anything else. I mean, everything was.
So was he considered an autocrat?
I would say that's an understatement.
Okay, sorry. I know that he was considered a dictator, but how do you differentiate dictator and autocrat?
I don't know how I would, but he was all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a supreme ruler, and
sort of like North Korea's.
He wasn't far off from North Korea.
He was inspired by North Korea. In fact, the 80s are why
he explicitly said that.
He had visited North Korea, like at the very beginning of the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and brought back a lot of that idea of cult of personality and a lot of the things North Koreans had. So that visit marked a turning point in some ways. But Ceausescu, as I know you both know, was really good at playing the West. I mean,
I don't know this.
Why he got these visits, the presidential visits from Americans, because he loved to just look like, I'm going to just be the one who walks a little bit away from Moscow, whatever.
So he's playing the middle.
Yes, while ruining his people.
Well, one of the hallmarks, I think, of authoritarian mindset is this desire for grandiosity and large things.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to a psychologist, which Julia is sort of.
Yeah, I got to jump on that.
Yeah, to interpret that, but it's certainly something that I have observed. And just to add another sentence or two to that, I have said for some time that the worst instinct of human beings is the desire to control others.
Yes.
And that entered my mind, I don't know, about 20 years ago. And it has stuck with me as, definitely something that is true. And I think authoritarians, I mean, that is kind of their driving impulse is to control others because they believe they know the right way.
Wait a minute. Their instinct is to control others. I'm going to argue with that it's because they think they know the right way. I think superficially it seems like they think they know the right way, and sort of that's our sort of rational interpretation, our non-psychological interpretation, political interpretation, let's say. But psychologically, why does anyone have the need to control anyone else? I mean, let's assume that the person's not floridly psychotic. Let's assume that someone's like not completely mentally ill. It's usually because they're afraid and they think the way they will be safe is if they can control their environment. And that comes from early childhood trauma.
I think that's that certainly just or not justifies, but explains how they come to this strategy or tactic of controlling others. But
that was true throughout the Eastern Bloc. I mean, all of those leaders. And what they knew, two things: if they didn't control their people, they would be overturned because they weren't popular. And if they didn't stay in power, Moscow would get them overturned or dead.
Right. So they're not safe. There's no move that's safe for them except for to try to do this controlling thing,
Yeah.
which doesn't actually work ever for anyone in the long run,
Which
ever.
only works by fear. It wasn't like
it doesn't even work. But I mean, for the short periods of time that it works by fear, right? And so grandiosity always comes from this secret belief that you're too small and you're not enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the opposite of whatever you're projecting out there,
That's very close to the title of Mary Trump's biography of President Trump, which
I was just thinking of that. What is the
what is the
title of that book?
The title is Too Much, but Never Enough. I don't think that's it, but it's something like
that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, and okay, so I'm always like, well, what's the other side of this? Everyone's got a little of that, right? Because no one is really healed. We're all like broken in various ways. So everyone has their way that they're going to try to like figure out how to be safe and figure out how to be healed and try to be enough. And then the question then becomes a geopolitical question, which maybe like I personally think, as Carmen knows, maybe geopolitics are something like psychology writ large. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Large on a global scale, right? But maybe sometimes in some situations you need someone who has a particular pathology.
Oh.
I mean, I'm not saying like that's ideal, because I'm an idealist. I'm like, no, everyone should be psychologically healthy and we should all get to a place like, that I would love to be in all the time, which is where everything's great and you understand all this stuff and you're emotionally mature, etc. But maybe the way the world is right now, you need certain pathologies at certain times to get to the next place, because you're dealing with a messed up world full of pathology. Maybe you need a pathological person to deal with that. And I'm not talking about Trump or anyone. I'm just saying, like, in world leaders, maybe that's why we haven't gotten over the grandiosity stage,
Well, Julianne, you go first.
I was going to say, to push back just a little, that might have worked let's say, 1970, 80. Once the world is open to everyone to see and hear and know because of social media, because of television, because everything is coming over people's phone, from the smallest village in Africa to New York City, people get enough information, often information that's been channeled in a specific way, to make opinions. And I'm not sure that having somebody who's pathological helps us in the way that it might have been we could overlook it prior to the world that we live in now. I say that because one of the most interesting jobs I ever had in the Foreign Service was heading up the office that did public opinion polling worldwide. And being not fully surprised, but impressed by how much people knew about what was happening in the United States, and how much they knew about what's happening in neighboring states or in their own country. And it certainly swayed their opinions. And, they were able to suss out people who were not US leaders, who were not going to be acting in their interest, or who were on the verge of authoritarianism, or even worse, sort of colonialistic type of, if that's a word, energy. You just can't get away with it the way you could before, I would say. So that's why I guess I'd push back a little on what you were saying.
Yeah. No, I understand that, but I think it has to do with the time frame.
So one thing,
yeah, Carmen's gonna break it.
I don't agree that everyone is broken, or at least I would ask you to explain what broken means. Because we all have histories, we all have wounds, we all have scars. But I don't think we're all broken. And I actually believe the majority of humans are not broken. And I couldn't tell you where that dividing line is. I do think sometimes societies get broken. So that's one thing I want to mention.
For sure.
And the second thing I want to mention is that it is true, or I'm not going to say it's true, but the experiences we've had historically give us many examples where to replace or to evolve beyond a really broken system, the person that started that process rarely completes it, if you look at it historically, but starts it is a son of a bitch. And almost always a son, always masculine. Julianne, you were Soviet specialist. I've been a Russophile all my life. And Lenin, who followed the Romanovs in the Russian Revolution, and then Stalin after him, were both pathological, to use your word. And, you can imagine a scenario where, someone like, well, you can't really imagine the scenario where Kerensky, who was the moderate figure in all of this, was able to rule, just before the revolution occurred in 1917, or rather the Tsar abdicates. There were a whole bunch of people with plots trying to engineer him out, because he was perhaps he was a broken person in a way, although he was a weak person. He didn't have the qualities to get over the hump. So, and there are, Mao Zedong in China. I mean, you can point to many, many moments of really societal dysfunction, that the start of the process to get to a better place involved, well, the hockey stick effect. You had to get worse before you get better.
And the more domineering the previous one was, the more radical and abusive the people coming in afterwards had to be.
Yes. And then the third point I will make is that the whole point of democracy, a democratic system, is to avoid those pendulum swings. I mean, I always use the very simple metaphor of a well-functioning democracy is like a lightly swinging pendulum, where there's a nice rhythm and you go back and forth, and but everything, 80% stays the same. Well, in America, we have left that place. And I don't think democracies work very well when the pendulum is swinging wildly. This is not a very good situation for democracy. So that concludes my 3 points.
May I, is it okay, Julianne, is it okay if I?
No, go ahead, please.
I want to work backwards from your last point. I think it's not that the pendulum is completely loose from that system and sort of swinging towards the edges. I think it's because the pendulum has become a digital clock. Like, it's a completely different, like the metaphor is just right. So now it just makes these leaps between places rather than swinging. And so it's a whole new model that we don't, it's like the country is young and now the country is in adolescence and we're trying to figure out who we are. And, to take a psychological model. So it sort of makes sense from that standpoint, that that's what adolescents do. They'll try this thing. I'm going to be a goth. Oh, that didn't work. I'm going to be like a trad wife. Okay, that didn't work. Who am I? So that's psychologically, I think, actually where we're at. But on the brokenness thing, I think it's just that we use that in different ways. So when I say everyone's broken, I say it like as a point of pride to indicate we each have wounds. We've each been broken. We've had breaks. Maybe it's better to passive voice it and say we've had breaks. Everyone's, if you live long enough, you have wounds.
Yes.
I can
Now,
agree with that. At some
yeah,
point, we have breaks, and the mark of a more peaceful life, I hesitate to use happier, is calmer life is when you heal,
yes, how you recover from those
how you
breaks.
recover from the break. Yeah.
Right. But the breaks are in there too, and they give you that. There's a Native American tradition, and I forget which one, so I'm just going to sound like this white person who's talking about Native American traditions. But anyway, there's one of them that I understand that talks about how your heart, when you're born, your heart is like a cup and it's facing down, and it takes great loss or great love, sometimes both, to turn it up and over so it can now receive and transmit actual love. And so that process is a very careful process of an injury happens, a great love happens, which is basically like tragedy because, you know, because it's really hard to be in love with someone really deeply. And so that turning over, if that gets messed up sort of developmentally, if it never turns over because there's so much defense around it, so that that person is like, I'm not turning over my heart. I can't get that vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's when what Carmen you would call broken happens, and what I would call not yet healed. Um, and so, but your capacity to have compassion for other people who have these breaks comes from having what we call this break or this flip. And so it's good, I think, that many people have had that. And I think what doesn't work in the short term is countering those people who have had trouble flipping that heart, countering them with shame or blame or anger, because that's just like they're like, see, that's why I never flipped my heart over. Right?
But while I'm listening to you talking about that, Julia, the thing that was coming to my mind was what happened in Charlottesville a few years ago. I was there with people from my church,
Oh,
sort of
wow.
stand, sort of as sentinels of, or how can I put this, that we were there to observe and to push back against that idea of hate that was coming in. And that was one of the most notable moments of my life. It was an ugly day. It was a sad day. It was an incredibly scary day. But for me, as somebody who grew up in Mississippi, I went to integrated schools, but I was probably just 1 or 2 years after integration started. So, but for me, that was all I knew. And so I had this idea that unlike maybe a great uncle of mine who was probably in the Klan that we didn't talk about, people my age, it had started to change and, blah, blah, blah. And then here I am at Charlottesville, and most of those people who were marching were in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And that broke my heart because I was like, this is not what I expected. But it was like, it was okay to say this. And just to go back for 1 second to Romania, one of the t-shirts that you saw that one of the guys was wearing was Codrano, who was one of the original Iron Guard militia, And it was like, now all the people who are, part of these groups that were historically groups, whether it was the KKK or whether it was whatever it was in Europe that we're seeing now, again, the fights about in Europe, and our own vice president telling Romania in a speech this past week that you can't cancel an election because this right-wing person who it's illegal by their constitution and who definitely did some illegal things during that election, you can't cancel that election because a democracy means you take all types. And so all of that just is coming to me as you're talking about broken people and how democracy functions and that kind of thing. And where do we stand? What is the right thing to do during a Charlottesville? Do you just let it happen? Do you go there like we did to make sure that people in the town who were people of color knew that not all white people in Charlottesville that day was feeling that way. How do you do that? How do you, yes, I understand that we're to have empathy and we're to show grace and all those many things, but it's now we're at a point in life in our own American history where I didn't think I was going to be one who had to be out there doing something. I thought that was all resolved by my parents' generation.
Yeah, that was not true. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm
I
getting
mean,
from Carmen's face, she didn't know I was in Charlottesville. I thought I told you that.
No, I know. I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yay. I'm glad you
yeah.
were in Charlottesville.
I
I'm
mean,
glad I survived it. But anyway.
I have this conversation a lot with people because I bring up unconditional love a lot and how important it is for people who are hurting. It's the only response that works. And they say, yeah, but this is an emergency. We need to stand.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you understand? It's like like I'm telling you, this is the only weapon that works is
Mm-hmm.
love. And you're telling me, but it's an emergency. We have to use a less efficient, less effective weapon. I'm like, no, it's an emergency, so you need the love.
Even
Like,
more.
like that's exactly the reason. And so it's like, yeah, it's an emergency. So guess what? We have to figure out why are these people hurting?
Yeah.
Why do they have hate?
And that's
How
why
can
I
we get
felt
them
like
some love?
we were doing
And
the
you were
best.
doing that. Of
Yeah.
course you were doing that. There's no that like of course you were doing that.
Yeah.
So it's not so there's a confusion about what love
Yeah.
means. The
Yeah.
people think that love means accepting someone else's behavior. Unconditional love is accepting someone else's behavior, and that's not what it means. It means loving them regardless of if they're a Nazi. And as a Jew, I have to say, like, that's not an easy thing, right?
I bet.
Okay, so school me. How are love and acceptance different?
Well, acceptance is the first step, right? Acceptance, let me differentiate those. We're talking about behavior versus the essence of a being. So if we're talking about accepting the essence of a being so you can move towards loving the essence of a being, that's what I'm talking about with unconditional love. This is completely orthogonal, has nothing to do with behavior. So you can say to someone, you have, raped this many people, you have killed this many people, you're gonna go behind bars. That's great. That's where you should be. Um, I don't want you anywhere near my family or any of my friends or anyone I know, and I love you deeply. So is the behavior and the essence, we've somehow combined them because we've lived in this behaviorist culture that says the only way you could know about someone is through their behavior. That's who they are. But when you start to think about when we lose the idea of a soul or an essence of a person, you lose the capacity to say, regardless of your behavior, I love you. And then the way I treat you in terms of your proximity to me and my family and where you are in the world, and whether I go to a protest or not and say, hey, you should not be doing these things,
Mm-hmm.
that has to do with your behavior. And that is not the same as the essence of a person. And so it's like we have lost this idea because we've bought into this materialistic culture that says there is no essence of a person. Everything is the behavior.
Yeah, I'm still not.
You're not convinced.
What I struggle with here is if you don't want to have anything to do with that person, if you want to insulate yourself from that behavior,
Yeah.
what is the operational value of saying that you still love that person?
Yeah, but look at the word operational. So
Well, pick a different word. Just
no, but I mean like
what is the value? I
yeah,
don't
but
mean
so
operational.
the question, not needing an operational value, needing like a maximum utility as an economist.
Yeah, I didn't mean utility. I just
No, I
meant
know, but like it's the same kind of thing. The question is about what is the actual value to your life? It's an internal value. When you experience anything but love for someone's essence, you're tied to them. So there's a murderer you're angry at because they murdered someone in your family. You're now tied to them by hating them. If you experience love for them, you can let them go the boundary because there's nothing, there's no friction there. Like, yeah, I'm having a boundary. I get it that your behavior isn't appropriate. There's something wrong with you. Staying away. Love you, right?
Well, that's the essence of grace, right? It's undeserved love.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it is more important for me to love for what it makes me and my heart and soul about, not that the other person. Half these people could care less if I love them or hate them. They really don't know who I am, and they
But
don't
that's
care.
not the point. It's for
And
you.
that's not the point. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's for myself too, to be a loving person.
And you make better boundaries with people when you love them because you don't feel like you're like bad for withdrawing love. You're like, no, I'm not withdrawing my love. I'm just having a boundary.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still skeptical.
All right.
I'm
Well,
not.
We don't have enough time left in this
I
call for
know.
us to
I
go
don't
through.
know. I'm not parsing it.
well,
You know,
yeah,
I think that, what just to kind of go to a somewhat different place where there's perhaps uh
more common ground.
more, well, yeah, more productivity or something. I, and to your point, Julianne, that these people don't care whether or not you love them. So a lot of this development of this particular strand in American meaning has been developed, kind of in the back channels of the internet.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, I'm hopeful that the same back channels of the internet can be used to develop and strengthen a counter movement to this movement.
Hmm.
But the problem is that people like, I'll just say me, I have a hard time not seeing both sides of an issue. It is very difficult for me to be definitive about this is the way it should be. I see both sides. And the people that are part of the Charlottesville contingent don't seem to see both sides. They don't seem to articulate it. They act as if they don't see both sides. And I think that's quite problematic because one group of, I mean, here's another kind of breaking point in a democracy. Everybody in the democracy has to see all sides. And when they don't, then, and a really significant group doesn't, you have an operational problem.
But Carmen, I would say that people that we're talking about would say, I don't have the luxury of seeing both sides. My world is coming to an end. The world as I know it is ending. You're asking me to do something that I am in absolute, I've got to go to war to fix this. I do not have the luxury of seeing both sides. My world is ending, or is a threat of ending.
Well, and you could say that about people in Black Lives Matter as well, who might say, right? I mean, so both of those, I think we have a real problem in this country of people not seeing both sides on both sides. I'm not saying they're equivalent. Like, so just to be clear, like if I were at Charlottesville, I would not be in the Unite-the-Right rally. I would be on Julianne's sort of let's talk about grace and love and represent what could be true and good here. But
you'd be seeing This Little Light of Mine with me at the Methodist Church
100%, I love that song.
courtyard.
All right. But I don't think it works part of seeing both sides is seeing that the psychological, I mean, it's all psychology, right? The psychological injury, like Julianne said, of where these people are coming from, they feel like they're in an emergency situation. And that's true of both sides. And frankly, if you believe in whatever they believe on each side, you would think you're in an emergency situation. Because you are. If you're a white person and you're a white nationalist and you think the best thing is for this country to be a white nationalist, then you're in an emergency situation. Because guess what? That's not the demographics.
Yeah.
You know? So
well, somehow I think since we've reached an hour, somehow I think we have to get to the other shore and
but what is the other shore? I mean,
well, I'm just saying from a conversational point of view, get to the happier shore. as opposed to ending our conversation
on a negative note.
On
See, this feels very
fear.
positive to me because we're bringing up all the truths of uncertainty, seeing both sides, unconditional love, people's confusion about unconditional love. And that's the other shore is, I think, maybe recognizing historically this is where we are. Like we're in the middle of history. It's always messy. When you talk about functioning democracies needing everyone needing to see both sides, that's never been the case. It's always been unbelievable arguments, and we've actually made it. So to me, I sort of feel like this is it. This is the juice of it. We can have this conversation. We're not getting killed because we can have this conversation. That's fantastic. Like I have a low bar.
And I can have this conversation because I'm a white middle-aged woman who's going to do something to me. I'm retired, so I don't even have to worry about my job. I have that luxury, and that's why I could go to Charlottesville and wanted to go to Charlottesville because I was not going to probably be hit. I watched other people be hit, brown people be hit, but I wasn't one that they were going to come clock,
Yeah.
But anyway,
and
let's get
what
to the
about
other shore for Carmen. Carmen, what's on your other shore?
Yeah, but what's on the other shore? Because I think that to me this is all about people forgetting to separate the behavior from the essence of the being.
I don't know what's on the other shore. The only thing I think I know is that, well, I liked your point that it's no longer a pendulum, that it's digital, because I like the way that you destroyed the metaphor, because I think that got us closer to truth.
Yeah.
Or reality, whatever the right word is. But I think I just think that we're going through spasms that are the result of all sorts of imbalances in our society. I mean, we could list 100 imbalances in our society. That's these spasms. I just hope that the spasms don't become, historically horrible as they have happened to many other societies. And I will tell you, and I'm I'm ending on a down note, but one of my favorite heuristic devices when I was an analyst was the rule of anniversaries, that when a society starts making a big deal of a big anniversary, trouble is looming. I mean, this is totally unscientific, but has been a useful heuristic thing for me. And
do you mean like the bicentennial?
The classic example is the Romanovs of Russia, who celebrated their 300th anniversary of rule over Russia in 1913, and
seconds later.
Seconds later. And I think the fact that we're approaching our bicentennial, this is Carmen, the Sherman and Peabody style of analysis. Beware the anniversary, beware the hubris that approaching an important anniversary creates.
Well, you definitely punctured that balloon for me.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Oh man.
So it's just, but I mean, I'm basically an optimistic person, and I you know what they say, sometimes you just have to keep going till you get to the other side, and we're just gonna have to keep going till we get to the other side, and none of us can imagine, I don't think, what that other side is going to be. If we even tried to go through the intellectual exercise of developing it, it would not resemble what the other side actually ends up being.
And that's the irony. At least you and I spent our careers as analysts, and I couldn't have predicted half of what's happened in the last 10, 15 years.
Right.
And I found I hate to tell you, but I found the anniversary thing hopeful again because it okay, so things could completely fall apart into a new part.
Yeah.
I mean, so the worst thing that could happen is all of humanity dies. But like every single country goes through these changes that are kind of massive every couple hundred of years.
Right.
And so why should we be any different? Do we think we were different? We did think we were different, but like, oh well.
No, I agree. I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. This is just a necessary thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's using the term special in the very negative way of like, bless your heart, you're special kind of way.
Yeah.
You know, well, you're special. You know, like that's sort of how I think I've now started to think about our country, but because we're not that special. So many other countries in the world are dealing with exactly the same pressures and results that we are.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I thought I was really against, and that just, it was like fingernails on a blackboard for me, was when people talked about American exceptionalism. And 15, 20 years ago, I would make myself quite unpopular when those few times when I dared to express I'm not sure really what this American exceptionalism is. I'm
I'm
not
so glad to
buying
hear
it.
you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Whenever I hear that, I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I've always had that view. And anyway, I don't know. I just don't think no matter where we go from here, we're going to get any more optimistic. So
I'm through the roof because there's people like Julianne and Carmen who are out there in the world understanding what's happening. And we're not at the end yet.
No, that's true.
So what's there not to be hopeful about?
Well, along the way, many people will have horrible experiences.
Absolutely. That's the nature of life.
Yeah.
Everyone suffers. Yeah.
Just buckle up, buttercups, because here we go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the nature of life. What can we do? What can we do to love people as they're going through pain is the question, including ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, well, I'm not going to start another strand because it's just not going to end anywhere good. So, Julianne, did this conversation go the way you thought it was going to go?
I'm not sure. I did go back and watch the one that you recommended that I watch. And
which one was that one?
That was the Sue Gordon.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting one. I didn't realize she had been a basketball player, so I loved how you picked up on that. So yeah, no, I think this was very interesting. And I would like that it wasn't just focused on me. I like that it became very much a three-way conversation.
No, well, we like that too. I mean, essentially, all the good ones end up clearing debris.
Yeah.
So that hopefully all of us, and then hopefully some of the listeners can think a little more clearly about whatever the issue is. And so we were very busy with our brooms today. Very busy.
Trying to clear out our own minds.
Yeah, clear out our own minds. Yeah.
Well, you should have told me ahead of time to work on that before. I could have skipped doing my elliptical. That'd been much better to wipe out my own brain. But was it what you guys wanted? Was this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I want this part of the conversation in the recording if possible.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, you're the editor.